Good morning, Calvary. How are you? Sorry, I had my microphone open when I coughed. I didn't know I did that, so that's my fault. Thanks for being here today. And I want to say thanks to all the people who came early and helped and assembled things together, and people who are at different times. I know a lot of you come at 8 or 9:15, and you're like, 10:45, that's so late. But you were flexible, and you came, and I'm thankful for you being here today as we allow God to speak to us on a day like today. I do want you to be aware of the schedule this week, so it was just covered, but I'm going to show you a slide because some people are visual learners and you want to remember it that way. This coming Christmas Eve, we'll have a noon, 5, and 7. The noon will be more of a traditional. All three of them will have candlelight services, so parents, please guard your children, right? New building. It won't burn easy, but we don't want you to burn either, so that's good. We're going to be prepared for that, and at 5 o'clock, there'll be childcare for that, and 7 o'clock, and usually it's a great chance for you to bring families, and often it's really crowded, so we encourage you to get here early and be excited about that. It's about an hour, and I only speak about 10 to 15 minutes because we know the kids are going to be coming in. It's a very experiential time of service. Next Sunday is Christmas Day. 10:45, one service. Good news, we got practice this week. We just didn't anticipate it. 10:45 next week, and we hope you'll come for that on Christmas Day. We wanted to make it a chance to open presents and do all that fun stuff, but we'd love to have you there for that. And then New Year's Day, there will be no 8 o'clock service, but there will be the 9:15 and 10:45 service. And then at 10:30 on New Year's Day, we're doing the ribbon cutting, where you can go and then tour the new building. And January 8th, we're so excited about how God has provided, and we're going to be in that new space. And we're excited about where we're going. It seems like God has given us so much blessings, and we're thankful for that, and we're leaning into that. Thank you for how you're serving. And we're doing this series called More, and we've discussed the idea of having more favor and more joy, and we've been looking through the book of Luke. And today we're going to continue that More series, but I'm not going to tell you what it is just yet. Instead, I'm going to tell you the character that we're looking at, and the character's name was Joseph. I know that's shocking, a week before Christmas. We're going to look at the life of Joseph. But if you have your Bibles, turn with me to Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 7. Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 7 says this. In those days, a decree went out to from Caesar Augustus that the whole empire should be registered. This first registration took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, so everyone went to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family line of David. That is hugely important. To be registered along with Mary, who was engaged to him and was pregnant. While they were there, the time came for her to give birth, and then she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him snugly in cloth and laid him in a feeding trough because there was no room for them at the lodging place. We talked about that through the life of Mary the last couple of weeks, so I'm not going to go too much into Mary, but I discovered in Luke there isn't much about Joseph, so I want to piggyback off Luke's version of Joseph and look in Matthew 1, 18 through 25, and we're going to talk a little more about Joseph from that passage as well. Here's what it says in Matthew 1, 18. The birth of Jesus Christ came about this way. After his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, it was discovered before they came together that she was pregnant by the Holy Spirit. So her husband Joseph, being a righteous man and not wanting to disgrace her publicly, decided to divorce her secretly. But after he considered these things, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared to him in a dream, saying, Joseph, son of David, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, because what has been conceived in her is by the Holy Spirit. Think about hearing that statement. That would be a hard statement to hear, right? And she will give birth to a son, and you are to name him Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins. Now, all this took place to fulfill what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet. See, the virgin will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and they will name him Emmanuel, which is translated, God is with us. And when Joseph got up from sleeping, he did as the Lord's angel had commanded him. He married her, but he did not know her intimately until she gave birth to a son. And he named him Jesus. Now, last week we asked you to put you in the place of Mary. And for some of you, that was easier because, well, you're females and it's easier to imagine yourself as Mary. Usually, when I look at this story, I always look at it through the lens of Joseph. And I just try to wrap my mind around all that was going on at that time. I mean, he was very likely, he could have been as young as 16. The commentaries do not agree on how old Joseph was at all, but he could have been as young as 16 or as old as 20 or 21. So let's just say he was 17. Think about that. 17. 40-year-old man engaged to be married to a woman who comes and tells you, hey, guess what? I'm pregnant. The baby's not yours, but I love you. Don't worry, the baby's of God. I don't know about you, but at 40-something years old now, I don't know that I could. At 17? And when he received this news, I kept thinking, why? I imagine he kept thinking, why, God, why me? And we see in this passage that Joseph was a man of great integrity and of great responsibility. How do we know he was a responsible guy? Well, in verse 19 of that passage, it says he was going to divorce her quietly. And that's an important fact, because at the point when Mary came to him and said, hey, guess what, Joseph, I'm engaged and the baby's not yours, he could have, because at this point the angel had not appeared to him, he could have righteously and by the laws of those days taken her before a tribunal, if you will, and they would have started picking up stones and stoned her to death. But it said Joseph, being a righteous man, decided to divorce her quietly. And you think, well, why would he have divorced her? Because that was what the righteous thing to do was in that day and time, following the law. He was a righteous man. And did you know that after the angel appeared to him, it says in verse 24, he did as the Lord's angel had commanded him, and he married her. I like to think that he was righteous and full of integrity, because when God said, do this, he said, okay. And I don't know if you remember, but we prayed this prayer a lot this year. God, where do you want me to go? And help me to go there. I think this would be a very hard prayer to pray and an answer to get at this time. God, where do you want me to go? What do you want me to do? I want you to marry a woman who is conceiving a child that is not yours. And by the way, you're going to raise the Son of God. I didn't really mean to sign up for that, God. And I look at this and I'm amazed at his integrity and how responsible he was. But I noticed something this week, and I've read this passage a lot, and I noticed something this week and really thought about something at a depth and a magnitude I hadn't thought of in a long time. And if you notice in the Luke passage, it says, and they went to register Mary, who was engaged with them, who is pregnant. If you notice that when he went off on this journey, why did he have to take Mary with him? You see, when you were betrothed that day, which is, we use the word engaged often in translations, because how many oftentimes do you hear someone saying, I'm betrothed to her, right? When he was engaged to her, it was a legally bonding and binding agreement. That's why he would have had to divorce her, because it was saying, but the wedding day was coming. But I think what I found this week in my research is that most scholars agree if the day of the wedding had not come, Mary would not have had to go with Joseph to Bethlehem. So the wedding day had come. So Mary had to go with Joseph because now they were man and wife according to the government. Now think about that. And think about that in light of what I'm about to reread in verse 24 and 25 of Matthew. He did as the Lord's angel commanded him. He married her, but he did not know her intimately until the wedding day. He did not know her intimately until she gave birth to a son. Here was a man who said, I'm going to marry you, but with little ears in the room, at least a couple. I'm going to be a good boy, and I'm going to respect what God asked me to do at 17 until the baby comes. Now, I don't want to go off on that, chase that rabbit too far. But think about that. This was a man who was responsible. And I sometimes sit there and go, okay, God, here I am as a pastor at this church in Indiana, And last night, I was stressing out over, do we do the 9:15 service? Do we not do the 9:15 service? Do we do the 10:45? And I was asking people's opinion, and people would give me their opinion. They gave me different opinions, and I'm sitting there going, God, the burden feels heavy. And then I was preparing this message, and I was like, yeah, that's not that big a deal. But have you ever noticed that it sometimes seems like we have all this burden on our shoulders? It's like we have to carry all these responsibilities of balancing our lives and our struggles. And we somehow wonder what's going on in this. And I look at the life of Joseph and I see a man who was poor, impoverished, not well educated, and was given the choice, or the challenge rather, of raising the Son of God. And his answer was, yes, Lord. I'm ready. So here's really where we're going with this today. I want you to realize that as you receive this Emmanuel, God with us, this baby boy, this precious gift that provides hope and light and favor and joy. This gift also comes with this gift, which may not always feel like a gift. This gift comes with more responsibility. Why was Joseph asked to be responsible? Well, because he was given a lot. And have you ever heard this with a lot of power comes more responsibility. Responsibility breeds more responsibility, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when I think about this, I think responsibility is not a fun word. Think about it. When we use the word responsible, okay? Yesterday I was responsible, and I went to the gym. I was responsible, I practiced responsibility, and I didn't eat everything that I wanted to eat. And we use the word responsibility almost exclusively in our context, in our culture, with this idea in mind. I'm not doing what I really want to do because it's the wise thing to do. I want to gorge myself on tacos. Pretty much every day. And that's not a sermon illustration, that's just a fact. But that's not the responsible thing to do, right? And so we look at this and we go, why has God asked us to be responsible? And what does it look like? You see, we were called to be responsible since the beginning of time. I'm going to leave the Christmas narrative for a moment to set it back up, and we're going to come back to it. In Genesis 1:26, it says this. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and they will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock of all the earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth. So from the very beginning, God placed man and made him in the image, and he was supposed to rule over. He had responsibility over the animals and the creatures. And in chapter 2, verse 15 of Genesis, it says, then the Lord God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to work it and watch over it. Now, this was all before the fall, or the first sin of the world. God placed man and woman in the garden, and he said, guess what? You get to be responsible for all that's taking place here. But the beauty, the way God had set this up is that the ground was working well, right? And everything was going smooth, but he gave us a choice. Because part of the responsibility isn't just being a mindless person who goes and does whatever you're supposed to do. Part of the responsibility is choosing to do what is right. So God placed in the garden this tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And I always like to describe this. You may have heard me say this before. The reason that tree was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is because men and women, Adam and Eve, already knew good, but they didn't know what good was until really they knew what evil was. And when they neglected their responsibility and they ate of that fruit, when they didn't do what they were supposed to do, when they didn't do the responsible thing, sin entered the world, and all of a sudden they knew evil. And the results of that were very, very damaging to us all. Genesis 2:16 and 17. And the Lord commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I want to make sure you know it's there, right? From the day you will eat of it, you will certainly die. So they ate of it and ignored God's calling. In Genesis 3, verse 17, God responds to them after he finds them, and he said to Adam, because you listened to your wife's voice and ate from the tree which I commanded, do not eat from it. The ground is now cursed because of you. You will eat from it by means of painful labor all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field, and you will eat bread by the sweat of your brow until you return to the ground, since you were taken from it, for you are dust, and you will return from dust. And if you realize what has happened here is all of a sudden the responsibility that we were given as a gift. You are made in the image of God. You are to carry out and take care of the world. You are to take care of creation. All of a sudden it became a heavy load and a heavy burden, and the weight of the world felt like it was on Adam and Eve's shoulders. You ever feel like responsibility is a burden? It's part of the curse. It's part of sin. But God, I want to, and it feels heavy. And maybe you're struggling with the responsibility of work. It feels like if you don't do everything just right, the work is going to collapse. Maybe you own your own business and you're sitting there going, God, I don't know how this is working. Maybe you feel the responsibility of raising some kids. When they make a wrong decision, kids, you may not realize this, but when you make a wrong decision, your parents sometimes think, oh my goodness, how do we mess up? And that's not a slight on you. They really are asking the question, how do we mess up? Because that's how they feel. And maybe through all of this, you're looking around and the world feels heavy. And this holiday season, instead of being a season of the gift of joy, the gift of favor, it feels more like a burden to you. It's not supposed to feel that way. Now, what I can tell you is it's always been a part of men and women's life to have to carry responsibility, because it was there before the garden, before the sin, I mean. Take care of the garden. Take care of the earth. Always been part of the responsibility. Work, always been part of the responsibility. But the other part of the responsibility that frees us is when we understand that we were made in the image of God. And even though we were made in the image of God to be in this wonderful, gifted relationship, we walked away. And in our brokenness, God could have left us to die because we failed in the idea of responsibility. But the gift of God was Emmanuel, this baby, this package came down to earth and changed the world, both in the past and in the present and in the future for all eternity. So that anyone who would receive him would know him and live with him and receive the gift of God forever. Now, in case you think this was an afterthought, since the beginning of time, God had worked out this plan. And what we have to realize is in carrying the burden of responsibility, let me give you an example. I can feel a lot of times I feel the responsibility of making sure this church grows. That's not my responsibility. Do you understand that? My responsibility is to stay so madly in love with God, to devote myself to him, and to allow him to move and speak and work through me, to take his words and share them, to give this gift into all of humanity. And I really know deep down I'm not worthy of this. And since Adam and Eve's sin, we've all felt that. So what do? I want to show you a picture. It's one of my favorite pictures of all times. It's a picture of Eve and Mary. And you see the serpent wrapped around, the one on the left is supposed to be representative of Eve, and you see the fruit in her hand, and she is devastated because she knows she was part of the fall. And if you've ever felt like that, the burden is heavy, I don't know what to do, and you've sinned, and you've fallen short of what you think you're supposed to do, and you feel like the weight of the world, and she's leaning out and she's touching the babe that would come in through the life of another mom, another woman. And if you notice, Mary's foot is on the serpent's head. I love that picture. And it's like God is saying, and I know this isn't in the Bible, and it's a picture and it's an illustration, but it's a promise of what has been and what has always been in the plan to bring about the fulfillment of this gift. Emmanuel, God has come and has saved us and redeemed us, and we can take the responsibility and the overwhelming burden of it, and we can sit there and we go, God, I give it back to you. I give you me. So move through me. Speak through me. Breathe through me. As your redemption has come into this world, may it come through me. You see, when you receive the gift of God, it compels you. In fact, when the gospel impacts our lives, it will always bring us into a place of having to accept more responsibility. But the good news about it is what we mean by responsibility. Do you know how responsibility is defined? There's different meanings, obviously. You can go through Webster's and there's like 30 definitions of responsibility. But in this context, here's what responsibility means: answerable and accountable. So as God has come into your life, you are no longer to live your life for you. You are answerable to Him. As God has come into your life, you are no longer accountable to no one. You are accountable to Him, and then we're accountable to each other. As Joseph that day received that gift of that baby boy, he knew, an angel had showed up and said, "Hey, Joseph, you are to be the father of this boy." He couldn't suddenly go, "Oh, okay, I'm going to do it my way." Yeah? He said, "Yes, Lord, what do you want me to do?" And this Christmas season, maybe we need to realize that the gift that God has given us with life and joy and a relationship through Him is not meant to be kept under our tree, but to be shared with the world. Here's the thing: responsibility isn't always fun. In fact, it's usually hard. But it's always rewarding. I don't remember a time in my life where I've sat there and gone, well, hated the fact that I went to the gym today. Bummer. I'm now skinnier. I'm not skinny, but skinnier. Boy, that was a poor, wise decision. Responsibility means you're checking yourself and you're saying, I'm placing myself under the care and the watch of God. And just like Joseph had the gift of receiving the gift of God in his life, so have you received that gift. And with this great gift comes more responsibility. His followers share what they know. So, here's my question. This Christmas season, how are you taking the responsibility of the gift of this present? The gift of God. How are you sharing this gift with the world. And if you don't know him, I would encourage you to know him, because it is the greatest gift in the world, because the weight of this world feels so overwhelming when I try to guide this life without leaning into him. Guys, I look at the 2017, and I think this is going to be the greatest year in Calvary's history, and I sit there and go, God, I cannot do this alone. I got news for you. If all of us gathered together, we couldn't do it without God. So God, take this responsibility off of us as we follow you. But God, at the same time, help me to sense the responsibility of you've given me this gift to be answerable and accountable to you with what I do with it. A lot of times we walk out of sermons like this feeling guilty, like, oh, I fell and I haven't done exactly. And that's not my intent this morning. In fact, I want to encourage you that this last year, God has used you if you've been faithful at all. And a lot of times God uses us in ways that we don't even realize. And so there's a card on your chair, the Jesus. This is the last time we're doing this, okay? And in just a moment, I'm going to give you a chance to fill out the following question. And I think this question is going to be on the screen here in a second. I want you to write on there, share a way that God has used you to share his love this year. Maybe it was babysitting for that single mom. Maybe it was just speaking into your spouse's life the power of Jesus. Maybe it was in being supportive. Maybe it was in being faithful giver for the first time. Maybe it was you were bold enough to enter and encounter and share the name of Jesus. But how has God used you? We asked you to pray this prayer almost this entire year. God, and the whole theme was expand where you go, expand what you know, right? And so this idea, we asked you to pray this prayer. God, where do you want me to go, and help me to go there? In praying that prayer, you took the responsibility of this gift on you. Guys, you're not failing. This church is growing. Maybe not today, but we're growing. We're seeing people baptized. We're seeing marriages turned around, and you're a part of it. Let's celebrate how God is using us. But let's not stop. Let's keep going. So in the next 30 seconds, I would invite you to take the card out. And once again, if you want it to be anonymous, you can. If you don't even want anybody to read it, you don't have to. But we'd like you to write something on there and place it on the bottom of that more sign out there. It's the last day we're doing it. We're going to share them, probably, social media, some of the stories, not all of them. It's too many. But I want to give you just a moment. And if you can't think of anything, then right now, here's my encouragement to you. Pray this prayer. God, from now on, show me where you want me to go, and help me to go there. But everybody else in this room, a simple thing. I was a faithful giver. A simple thing. I taught a Sunday school class. A simple thing. I took a pie to a lady in need. I stopped on the side of the road and helped change a tire and talked to them about Jesus. Something simple. Would you write that down and share it with us so that we can celebrate the fact that we are taking the responsibility and giving it back to God for God to move and breathe through us? Take the next 30 seconds and do that if you would. As you're wrapping that up, keep writing if you need to. I want you to be reminded of the fact that in the upper room, as Jesus was about to go, he was pretty much telling the disciples, hey, you got a lot on your shoulders. You get to build the church. Congratulations, you 12. Any pressure there? Any burden of responsibility in that room? And so maybe he knew that at times it would be overwhelming to do the work of God. And maybe he knew that sometimes in doing the work of God, sometimes we would make it about us instead of him. And so he said, whenever you gather, I want you to take the bread and break it. And be reminded that I took the responsibility of your sin and your mistakes and your irresponsibility upon me. When you ever take the cup, I want you to remind you that my blood was poured out for you. And as my blood was shed on that cross, I did it to take your responsibility upon my shoulders. So would you answer to me and be accountable? Would you give yourself this Christmas season? It's not about family. It's really not even about coming to church. Shh, don't tell anybody. It's really about Jesus. And so this morning we want to give you that chance. We're going to give you a few moments to pause as the deacons, if you would now go to your places. We're going to give you a few moments to pause and reflect and pray. Maybe this morning you want to pray the prayer, God, where do you want me to go, and help me to go there? We encourage you to allow this time to be kind of a reverent time, to not try to talk to your neighbor about where you're going to lunch, to really just allow God to speak to you, because this can be a wonderful moment. And the way we practice that here is if you have a relationship with Jesus, we allow you to come up to any one of our 4 stations. We have 4 stations, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, and we have a gluten-free station, I believe. We're good with the gluten-free? We are. Right back there by the sound booth. And what we're going to do is we're going to have you break off the bread, and the deacons are going to say something. This is to remind you of his body was broken for you and that his blood was shed for you. You take off the bread and you dip it in the juice. We don't drink out of the cup here because of germs and stuff. It's just a reminder that the blood and the body was broken for you. So come and celebrate that this morning and be reminded of how good he is. We're going to come back and sing a song at the end of this. So come now.